Hey, we are just so glad. Welcome once again to the Pastors Roundtable.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Right.
Good afternoon, man.
Good afternoon. I hope everyone's doing well. We are just excited. Once again, God has given us another opportunity to just join you on this beautiful Sabbath day as we lift up this wonderful topic. I can't wait to get into it.
Yeah. But before we get into our topic today, just kind of want to go over last week. We had first of all, we want to welcome those of you who are watching today. You're watching on so many different platforms today. Some of you are with us on Facebook. Some of you are with us on YouTube. I think we might have been sending a link or a signal or something to what is it? What's the IG thing? What's that stand for?
IG, Instagram.
I am not a millennial.
Something else.
Instagram and Twitter, et cetera. But we just want to welcome you. We're glad you've joined us today. Just before we get started, we want you to know we've got an awesome lineup today and a very intriguing discussion that you want to invite somebody to be a part of. So we want you to go ahead and hit that share button, share it with somebody, tag somebody that you want to be a part of, that you think needs to be a part of this discussion on what's the discussion on, by the way? Before we debrief last week, give them an idea why they're sharing today.
Mission and structure. Am I right, Pastor Wade?
Yeah, you're right. Mission and structure.
And we got some heavyweights that we won't introduce right now, but you definitely want to share it because I think this discussion is going to really give us some insight behind this church and how we operate, and maybe even give us some suggestions on how we could do this thing a little better if need be. But wait a minute. Now, last week we had I want to call it an organic show, right? You know what I'm talking about? But last week was great. I mean, we had Pastor Bird, we had Becker was there, and we had Doggett Jr. I mean, let me tell you, last week, and we got an insight on how the millennials think. I think one of those questions dealt with the millennials and how they feel about church, and the insight that Pastor Bird gave as well. So, and if you watched last week, you would know that we are just on season 1. This is just season one. We announced it last week, and so great things, big things are happening when we get to season 2. And so they were just giving us a little blurb of what's going to happen in season 2.
Yeah. This is episode, I think, number 20. What is it? 21? 21 this week. All right.
21 weeks. But listen, guys, before we really jump into things, this week has been a week from, as they say, a week from hell. This has been one of those weeks that you definitely decide that 2020 is over. It's done. It's over. We just don't want to do anything else. I know for a lot of people, their king has died. And they just don't know how to deal with it. And you probably I'm looking at your faces, and you're probably figuring, what is he talking about? But as you know, Chadwick Boswick, who played Black Panther,
43 years old,
has inspired so many people. He passed away sadly because of cancer, and he 43 years old.
Oh, wow. I hadn't heard that. I didn't know. This
Oh,
was the first time I'm hearing that.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Man, this week was crazy. You guys know that we were supposed to meet on Tuesday. Leon, you got a call that an aunt had passed on Tuesday. We moved our meeting to Wednesday. We got a call, and then Roger, you got a call that an uncle had passed.
That's right.
You put that on top of just the national stuff that we saw going on in Kenosha. The man shot in the back 7 times. And it's like we expected that we would not be here again this soon. And then to have on the heels of that, the young man walking down the street right past the cops after having killed, 2 people and shot a third.
It's a long day.
and it's just it's like it's exhausting. We said it was exhausting last time. And just that struggle that continues and continues. And while there might not be a whole lot of clarity, and people may be looking for clarity and more information and all that, it almost doesn't matter. It's just that it's here again on whatever side of these issues that you fall on. I listen, it's one of those things that makes you say, man, I can't wait for Jesus to come in.
Oh, yes.
Can't wait for this stuff to be over. And that, that kind of brings us full circle right back to what we're talking about here. Mission, structure. How do we get structure to be able to get this thing wrapped up? How do we structure effectively and efficiently, particularly as it pertains to the governance structures of the Seventh-day Adventist churches? So that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about the governance structures. We have talked about the financial structures. Had a wonderful program with that. And we talked about financial structures. We've talked about the racial structures or the ethnic structures of the church. And this week we are talking about the governance structures. And we've got some guests that are going to help us define that and figure out what we're talking about. What do we mean when we say the governance structures? So Dr. Henry, we've got a guest coming to us from the Southern Union, the great Southern Union. Would you mind introducing our guest from the Southern Union to us today?
We have a heavyweight coming from the South, Pastor Davidson. And let me tell you about Jim Davidson. He is the secretary of the Southern Union. He was a conference president for many years. I've come to know him as a person with integrity. He also shares a little bond with me. He was living at one time, I believe, in the Avon Park area and also in Kansas City. And so I'm just happy to have my friend, Pastor Jim Davidson, who is able to spend a little time with us on our program today.
Amen. Glad to have you, Doc. And then Roger, we've got one more guest coming from the West Coast, the left coast.
I am so happy to have my friend with me. We met prior to my moving to the West Coast. We worked on a number of projects. But when I got out to the West Coast, he opened up his arms and said, hey, come on by, talk with me, whatever you need. Good friend of mine. We're just so happy to have him here. Now, since we connected in California, he was serving as the Associate Youth Director of the Southeastern California Conference. But since then, the Lord saw fit to pluck him, and he served as the Executive Secretary of the Northern California Conference. And now the constituency of the Northern California Conference found such confidence in him that he is now the president. And so I'm so glad to have Marc Woodson with us today. So welcome, Marc. Welcome, Jim, to the Pastors Roundtable.
All right. Well, listen, before we get started, Pastor Paul, if you can begin with a word of prayer. And also, as you pray, definitely want to pray for my family as well. You already mentioned that my aunt passed away. She was really dear to me. And also for Pastor Wade, his uncle, and just for the people out there that's hurting. So if you could begin us with prayer.
Absolutely. Father, we just thank you for this opportunity that we have today. And as we engage this discussion and this topic, we are praying for the leading, for the guiding of the Holy Spirit. That, Father, what is said and what is done here today might inspire, might motivate the members of our church to engage wholeheartedly and fully the mission that you've placed on this church. We ask, Lord, that you would help to make our efforts more effective, to make them more efficient, so that what is said and what is done as we engage this mission will hasten your soon coming. Father, our special prayer this evening for my co-hosts. You know how their families have been impacted this week by the icy hand of death. And Father, we pray that you would wrap your arms around their families, their family members, and just let them know that you still hold them in the palm of your hand. Give them the hope of the resurrection, so that, Lord, as we live our lives day by day, that they will be faithful, so that we will be able to see you when you come as well along with them. For we ask it in Jesus' name.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, we want to get started with these questions. And again, to our guests coming on, thank you so much for being willing to share with us a little bit on your thoughts regarding this topic on structure, mission. And I want to start off with this question. You know, we talk about governance. So we want to define some terms today because we want all of our listeners to be on the same page as we talk about this subject. So what is governance as it pertains to this church? And if I could add another question in there, how has it developed within the Seventh-day Adventist Church? And what are the structures in the church related to governance at the various levels? So we're talking about governance. What does this mean? Okay, anyone could go ahead.
Well, I'll go ahead and start, I guess.
You called Pastor Jim a heavyweight, so I'm going to let the heavyweight go.
And I wasn't sure if I should be flattered or offended by the comment, but anyway, to me, governance within the church, obviously that's what we're talking about. Governance and governments may be different, but governance in the church, to me, it's all about what fosters the mission and the growth, the evangelism of the church. And to me, it's all about what we can do to accomplish the gospel commission. And of course, we know that we have a mission that we believe in our church is unique, something that we do feel compelled to carry to the whole world. And so through the years, from the founding of our church until now, governance has been there to try to enhance and to enable us to go to all the world. And it's had an interesting development, as you folks probably know. When the church first began, there was great resistance to any kind of organization, any kind. And yet through the years, through study, through councils, inspired councils, we were told that we needed to organize because one congregation, one person was never going to be able to accomplish this gospel commission. And so the church began to organize and to create, I'll call it governance structures, but I like an even better word, organized structures to foster that mission. And then we came to a period of time when a term that is, again, as Seventh-day Adventists we're familiar with, kingly power. People were afraid and they were concerned about that. And so the church structure, the church governance was diversified, so that there wasn't kingly power, so that a local church or even a local conference didn't have to go clear to the general conference president for every word of counsel or thought. So at any rate, to me, it's all about fostering the unique mission that God has given to us.
Okay. All right. I like your explanation of the development of the governance of our church. And you mentioned kingly power, and I was going to ask a question. Why were they afraid so much of kingly power, and what does that look like today? But I don't know. But yeah, they didn't want or they were afraid of organization. Pastor Woodson, Mr. President, tell us governance. Talk to us.
Yeah, I think it's I think with our history and the resistance toward organization is an interesting one in the history of our church. And I always harken back to this. We have in our prophetic understanding, we talk about Babylon, right? And usually if you preached any of the evangelistic series or anything or in Revelation and you talk about Babylon, we characterize that as being something that is today confusion and disorganized. At the beginning of the movement of our church, they considered Babylon being organized.
Wow.
As a church. So we've come a really long way. And the reason for that, and I think it still has implications for us today, is that these were people that weren't planning, they weren't planning to start a denomination. They weren't planning to start a church structure with organization and everything else. They had come from the Connection Church. They had come from the Methodist Church. They had come from some of the Baptist churches. And because they were pushing this idea of a literal second coming and that Jesus was coming soon, they were excommunicated from their churches. And so they saw organization of churches and denominations being so stuck and rigid in their theology that they saw organizational units of a church discriminating and against them. So they didn't want to organize. So therefore, when you look from 1844, the church doesn't really organize officially as a full denomination until 1863, almost 20 years. And because of that resistance toward organization. So it was only out of the growing church and being able to keep order, which you'll find them talk a lot about gospel order, that the God is a God of order. And so that began to evolve and partly not only to protect the mission, but also to protect the name of the church and the work that it was doing, is why we ultimately organized. So governance is on that same thing. Governance is trying to keep order and for the structure really to be slave to mission and not the other way around.
Right. Wow.
Dr. Henry, if I could push a little further on that, I think that a lot of us, when we hear the term governance, what strikes the chord or what rings a bell is that's who's in charge or who's making the decisions or who's making the policy or the policies and the processes and things themselves. So when it comes to who's in charge or the bodies or the structures that lead the organization, right? So the organization has to have some leadership. What are the governance structures? How do they differ from level to level? So you've got a local church, you've got a conference, you've got a union, you've got divisions, you've got general conference. What are those structures that are in charge of governance at each of those levels? And then who makes up those structures?
And I was going to say, Pastor Paul, and then who's in charge? Like, who's really in charge?
Is it the guy behind the curtain, right?
We are, as a church, we're built, and if you look at the church manual, it talks about that we are built from a constituent base form. That's really with a representative kind of governance, if you can say that. So almost on every level, there's this sense that the average church member is actually the one that everyone else who may be an officer of a conference, union, division are responsible to. So you've got, I actually ask this when we're reviewing ordination candidates. I say, name all 5 levels of the church, because you've got to know about this church and how it operates. And it is, it is with that local congregation, and then it moves into the local conference, which is made up of churches by territory or region. Then you've got, of course, the next level, which is our union level, which is made up of a number of conferences. In my particular union, which is the Pacific Union Conference, we have 7 different conferences that make up our union, of which my conference is one of those, the Northern California Conference. And then, of course, we all, as conferences, I believe there are 59 conferences in our division. And that's the North American Division, which is a division of the General Conference. And then there is the General Conference. And so out of all of those levels, except for really one, there's a constituency. We discovered this a few years ago in one of the kind of a conflict that we had on a particular issue that we're probably
wonder what that issue was.
Yeah, well, that issue was on making a change. I don't get into the weeds on it, but it was making a change in policy that a president of a conference did not necessarily have to be an ordained minister. They could have been ordained or commissioned minister. Now, of course, that had some ramifications that had to do with women who were in ministry. Could they be a conference president if they were not ordained? They were often commissioned. And so there was that change that was asked for. And we discovered that the division doesn't have a constituency. because it is a division of the General Conference. And the General Conference has a constituency, which at a time of a session every 5 years is the constituency of the whole General Conference. But every other level has a form of constituency. The local church, it's their church business meeting. The local conference is their constituency session that happens according to their bylaws. In the union, same thing, has a constituency. So we are really based upon the idea, and I say the idea, right. Because we're human beings, the idea is that really the power is from the bottom up, so to speak, from the people up to the government. That's somewhat like the United States. We really based our governance on how we govern the United States.
Well, you made the point about not having a constituency at the division level, but the constituency at the division level or the General Conference is the union. And there was this big uproar to get rid of unions. And that became the sticking point, that once you get rid of a union, where is that lower base or that constituency for the General Conference? And so I think that's when they pull back a little bit, and now they're trying to rethink things. But I wanted to jump on and say that I'm glad to hear when we spoke about governance that we spoke about it in the context of mission. And I want you to know, as a local pastor, that was never drilled into me as something that I shared with my local church. Governance at the local level normally just deals with the church board, business meeting, church board, business meeting. And there's never really any thought of it connecting it to mission. We're just trying to take care of business at home, make sure the checkbook is balanced, make sure, leadership is filled. And we don't really see the impact of what we do at the local level what are some of the things you could suggest, y'all can suggest, either one, as to what we can do at the local level to help us understand how governance connects to mission?
No, and I think that's something probably we as a church have not done as good of a job as perhaps we could have or should have, because again, it leads to questions, and yet the reality is that the governance or the structure of the Seventh-day Adventist Church is really a powerful driver of our mission. A friend of mine likens the church structure in this way, and I'll steal this idea, and that is there's two ways that you can fellowship together. You can have a picnic, or you can have a fellowship dinner.
Come on.
Now, if I go on a picnic with a group of people, my wife might bring potato salad and baked beans and Vegelinks and all kind of great stuff, and you or someone else may come to the picnic, and maybe your wife couldn't come that day, and you just show up with a bag of potato chips. Well, at a picnic, I eat my bountiful food, and you have your potato chips. That's it. But at a potluck, we pool all of that. So even though a person may show up with a bag of potato chips, they still get potato salad and baked beans and everything else. And so that's really how the church is structured. We're a potluck. We're not a picnic.
Okay, and so you're making me hungry.
We collaborate together, and by having these different circles of the church, by putting different entities together, we can actually do a lot more than if we didn't. Give you a quick example. And I'll start with an individual member. If an individual member never connected with a church, the ministry they could do would be very limited. But as they connect with the body, as they connect with a local church, they can do a whole lot more through their influence and through their friendships and through the body of the church. Well, a conference then takes churches and puts them together. And they're able to have academies and camp meetings and schools and other pastors and that type of thing. And then we take the conferences and we put those together, and we have unions, and then we're able to have universities and colleges. We're able to do evangelism on a wider scale than we typically would. And then we take those unions and we put them together in divisions. and they're able to do media ministries. They're able to do Breath of Life. They're able to do Voice of Prophecy. It is written, things that a union couldn't really do well by itself. And then you take those divisions and put them together into the General Conference, and we reach the whole world. Mm-hmm. And so kind of for me, in a nutshell, that's really what it's all about. And that is that by working together, we can do a whole lot more than if we just stay individual as either church members or just churches or conferences. By banding together, it's all about, again, coming back to just propagating the gospel to the whole world. And that's what the structure contributes to. And that, to me, is what it's all about.
Elder, if I can, let me just back up, because there was a comment that you made, Elder Davidson, I'd like to clarify. And at the beginning of your statement, you said that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you said that our structure is the great driver of our mission. And there's a lot of conversation now that would almost say that people, and I want to make sure I knew what you meant, that it almost should be the other way around, that mission should be the thing that drives structure as opposed to the structure driving the mission. When you said driver, can you elaborate just a little bit? What did you mean, that it's driving the mission, or that how did you mean that? Sure. A better word would have been facilitates the mission.
Okay. And because it's all about facilitating, making sure that the mission is going forward as Jesus commanded that it should. Yes.
Awesome. Okay.
I think because of that, I totally agree with that. Great illustration there, although you did make me hungry. I want to try your white potato salad. But I think because of that, when I could hear Pastor Rogers say that, hey, our people don't always hear that concept of the structure and the organization really facilitating mission, I think what that does then for us is we have to then constantly make sure that our organizational structures and models continue to facilitate mission in very healthy and effective ways.
Right.
So it's because of that, we should be constantly looking to make sure that structure is not getting in the way of mission. Mm-hmm. And there are some times, anybody who's worked for the church long enough, there are some times where you may sense that structure or policy has gotten in the way of carrying out mission in an effective and efficient way. And we have to always be careful to look at that so that structure doesn't become master.
Right.
And mission become the slave.
Yeah, let me ask this question when we deal with the structure. When was the last time we had a major structural change within our church?
Early 1900s.
So from that time till now, we haven't had a major, I think we put in regional conferences, but a major structural change is the early 1900s. I mean, what's the advantages of this structure now? I mean, evidently it's working, it's effective, or is it time, and I know we'll get to this question later on, but I think it's appropriate to ask it now. Is it time to assess the structure of the church? Because we talk about these different levels that we have: conference, we have the union, and then we have the division, which is a general conference operating on that side of the world. But is it time to assess it? I mean, what's your thought on that?
Hey, let me add this comment, because I know our guests can't always see the comments, and it piggybacks what you said, Dr. Henry. David Hume says, sometimes it depends at what time you get in line for food, because the dish may be finished before you get to it.
There is a man who has been to a potluck a time.
Well, they don't call it luck for anything.
Right. It's hard to assess, and have we had committees before that assess the structure of our church?
I'll let my friend go first on that. Well, and we talked about this a little bit earlier. Just not too long ago, I think it was in 2014, that the North American Division said, "Hey, let's do this assessment." Now, I didn't get to I wasn't able to be at that meeting. It was a call of all, I believe it was all the officers, at least the officers, and Pastor Jim can tell me because he was there. All the officers of all 59 conferences meeting in Virginia, I believe it was, to have that discussion and come up with some recommendations on how we can. Do we need to streamline? Do we need to do some things differently as it relates to our governance and as it relates to our structure? And there are a couple of books that you can find that are on this. I still haven't quite figured out what's supposed to happen with it, but I know there was that 6 years ago that was talked about, and we've been and even without that focus, you go to any meeting and you're always going to hear someone talk about, are we too big? Are we too top heavy? Do we have too many policies? Are we just, so you're always going to hear that discussion, but it would be good. I think it's always important and that we do it in ways that are consistent, irregular, because we always, the key is our mission, and we don't want anything to ever stand in the way of that. So,
right, and as Elder Woodson says, it's true that the church does look at that, but that was on a global, as far as North American division scale went. But I think that again, even within our conferences, unions, the division, et there's a constant, or at least I think there should be, a constant evaluation of are we using the structure in the most efficient way? Is it being used in the best way? And to me, that might be perhaps at least a more productive conversation than let's just throw it out and try to create something different. How can we take the structure that is serving the church well, but how can we make it better? And I, as a person who believes firmly in the creation story of Genesis, I hate to use the word evolution, but I'll use the word metamorphosis instead. And that is that I think we have to constantly be morphing our structure and the way that we do business. And that's not just structure. That's in every facet of what we do. Yeah.
A good example of that is when we were when we just made a move, I think it was last year. We were in one office for 47 years in the Bay Area, and then we moved to the Sacramento area. So those are, moving is fun, right? So that was quite a thing to do. But that was the opportunity time for us to then say, what are the things that we've got here in this office that, we looked at these files and we start realizing there were like all these files, and a lot of the information was duplicated, right? And so it's one of those things that you say, okay, to be a little bit more efficient, why do we have 4 files on the same exact thing? Let's maybe reduce that to 1 file so that we can be more effective and more efficient in where we go. So I wonder about that same thing when it comes to our conferences, our unions, our division. Are we duplicating things that we really should not duplicate, and therefore, and it's with this concept in mind, and this is, I probably shouldn't say this as a conference president, but I really believe this, and that is the most effective ministry happens at the church level. It happens at the church level. We who are in these other positions of administration must do everything we can to continue to support and resource where ministry is happening. Conferences, we don't baptize people in our office. That's not what we do. Okay. We try to make sure pastors who are baptizing and who are preaching and evangelizing, we make sure that, they're getting paid on time. Amen. Hallelujah. We make sure that churches are taken care of in terms of their insurance and all of that, the kind of mundane kinds of things, so they can be released to do the ministry in a real way. And so I think we've got to keep that in mind or that's something we need to wrestle with because everybody doesn't believe that necessarily, right? So, but if we are really strong in saying the church, that local congregation in that community is where ministry takes place best, then we've got to do everything we can to support that, in my view.
And I totally agree. Absolutely. Yes.
I have to give kudos where kudos belongs. And Pastor Jim, you know, your president is a good friend of mine. He was my senior pastor, and he taught me, brought me up in ministry, and showed me. He's gonna love when I say this. Brought me up in ministry, so I owe everything to him. My Lord, did I say that? But I love the fact that he has developed a culture in the Southern Union. Yes. That as administrators, you'll go to the local church to do evangelism. And right. You're walking there, and you work with the church, you develop the local church. And then when you leave, it wasn't the union office did the meeting, it was the local church that did the meeting.
That's right.
You'll do very well with that.
No, absolutely. Our conference, or our union president rather, it is not uncommon at all for him to do 4 to 6 evangelistic meetings per year, and which is often what a full-time evangelist would do.
Yeah.
And so again, and the Lord blesses those meetings incredibly. He really does. But it also keeps us connected and grounded to the local church, which, as again Elder Woodson said, that's the bedrock of our church. That's where ministry takes place. And
that's right.
The other areas of the church are for support, resourcing, widening the scope of the church in ways that maybe one local church can't do. So
that's true. Well, I think it was shared earlier. The word policy was dropped. You know, some people call that well, I guess it's 6 letters, but we call it, they kind of call it the 4-letter word. Policy was dropped. But what is the difference between policy, where the board that governs, they create policy? What's the difference between policy and doctrine? Because a lot of people get that mixed up.
Oh, I hear you. To me, you know, doctrine obviously is foremost, and doctrine is theological. Oftentimes, policy is more ecclesiastical or practical, and they're both necessary. I often say to a Constitution and Bylaws committee, and Dion, you might remember this when we served together there, and that is that just as our doctrines hold us together theologically, our conference bylaws, policies, etc., hold us together organizationally as a church, but they're not necessarily theological. They're, again, practical, how we do business, how we operate, that type of thing.
So what you're saying is policy helps move the structure or the organization along, and it's much easier to change than doctrine.
Yeah, actually, it would be. I'm
looking at Pastor Mark's face.
No, and what I'm thinking are like the North American division. There you go. Thank you. The red book.
There it is.
Call it. Yes. And
the other red book.
The unicorn.
Right. And we probably, for myself, being in Secretariat, we have at least 3 meetings every year. And we go over potential changes in policy. Those are taken to the North American Division year-end meeting every year. And every year there are policy changes every year. Yeah. Sometimes they're significant, sometimes they're not, just depends. But that red book contains the North American Division policies. And then unions will have certain policies, conferences, local churches have policies as well, and but hopefully they all help each other. They're all in sync with each other. So, but they do change, absolutely.
You know, and one of those one of the major differences too is how they get changed is probably what tells you what's easier or what's harder to change. So if we're talking doctrine, you know, we're talking about let's say for us, we're talking about basically 28 fundamental beliefs to a certain extent. That can only be changed at a general conference in session.
Okay.
That can't be changed by the general conference executive committee in between sessions. That can't be changed by a local conference. That those doctrines can't be changed by a union and its constituency session. Only every 5 years, with an entire general conference session, can representatives from around the world can our doctrines be changed. And so that tells you a little bit about what's a little easier to change as opposed to the other. As Jim said, that when we have that year-end meeting, we're making changes to that policy every year. Some substantial, some not so substantial. Every year that changes. So I think that's where you can see the importance of doctrine being theological. I think I totally agree with that. And the other being just really in a practical way, how we're going to function, not what we believe, but just how we're going to function. Because you will not find the details of how we're organized in Scripture.
Mm.
Now I know some people are shocked by that, but you will not find the way that we are organized in Scripture.
So we're not doing the Moses and Jethro thing or the
you might find principles,
Levi thing. Yeah.
You're not going to find the word General Conference President in the Bible.
Wait, what?
Right.
You won't find conference president in the Bible either.
You might find conference in a different way. So I think that's important too. That this is something that we believe came as a result of just good, real practical thought. I mean, when James White was talking about church organization, there were a lot of pushback, and people say, well, that's not in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And from a practical standpoint, he said, listen, everything that you're not going to find that's on a practical nature is in Scripture.
So some of the, there was always this talk about people, especially young people, they're leaving the church, they're leaving the faith. But when you really talk to them, you realize that they haven't really left the faith. They still believe in the doctrine. Their trouble or their issue is actually with some of our policies. Wow. The way we practice, the way we are organized is where we have. So, and the reason I brought that up is that we want our members who are listening to understand that there is a difference between doctrine and policy.
Can I really throw some gasoline on the fire here?
Go on, burn it up.
The discussion that we've had, and I know I'm poking my finger. The discussion that we've had on whether or not we should ordain regardless of a person's gender or sex, however you want to say it, male, female. That is a discussion that was not based upon theology. That was a discussion. Now, we had theological arguments, but we said ultimately that you could not do it based upon what the policy states or alludes to. So it was one of those confusing things where we started to equate policy with theology.
Wow.
And it wasn't until that 2015 General Conference session where we, for the first time, actually had a written theological understanding of what ordination actually is, for the very first time. So it's an interesting thing. We got that really confused. So those of us who are arguing this were saying, you're arguing something that you're making it on the level of this high theology. It's not one of our 28 fundamental beliefs. But when you look, and actually there's even, I'm putting gasoline even more, when you look at the policy, you won't find policy that states that you cannot ordain a woman to gospel ministry. It's not in the policy. It's not there. You won't find it. You'll find allusions. People will say, well, the pronoun he, we know we're talking about only men, but it doesn't say that you can, so you can argue that. But I think that's what confuses people. And we've got people that said, I can't be a part of a church whose theology, which is really policy, is that.
True. That is true.
All right. Well, listen, I think we've got around the denomination, and most of us that have pastored young people, Gen Xers and millennials and Zs, we often find, and it doesn't matter what generation you're in, every younger generation has always challenged a lot of the status quo. And so when it comes to policies that members in the pew have issues with, when it comes to policies that even pastors have issues with, then the thing that comes on the scene, or the question that arises, is our next pivot is process. So here's the policy. Policies are in place. But then when it comes to the process of how we get to developing these policies, what are the processes, or what is the process at the various church levels for developing the policies that we have? How do we get to these policies? Who is it? Just somebody says, "Hey, I want to do this." They write the president a letter, or they send the conference secretary or a union secretary and say, "Hey, we want to ordain women," or we want to make it a policy that you just pick something and throw it in there. What's the process? How does the process work? And I got a couple more questions here. Can these processes change, the process of how you do it, or is that set in stone as well? And from you guys' vantage points, does it seem like most of our people are happy with the process? Are they content with it, or are they simply tolerating some of the processes?
And let me just add one thing there, Pastor Paul. And when we talk about policy in the process, are we just talking about the working policy, or is there a different, like the church policy, and who gets the working policy? And if you get the working policy, how you change it? I mean, because when we talk about policy, I mean, there are a lot of policies in the church.
And Mark, you've been holding up that red book. Most of us on this panel, we know what that book is, but a lot of our viewers today have no clue what that book is. Tell us a little bit about both of those books. One of you, give us a little.
Those are tablets of stone. They've come from the mountain and were carved out. I just wanted to bring them to you. They're engraved in stone. We can't change them. No, just
Mount Silver Spring.
Yeah. So this red one is actually, so I'm going to read it. It says the North American Division of the General Conference Working Policy. So this is the division policy as it relates to the North American Division, which we know is a division of the General Conference. Okay. And that's important because there are policies that are more appropriate to the part of the world that we live in, as opposed to somewhere else. So that's why you've got a policy book for the division. And then very similar to it is I'm holding it upside down, is the General Conference Working Policy, which governs the entire the world church. And these two are very, very similar. You'll find some things in it the same. You'll find some things different. And so that's what you have there. You see how Elder Jim has read through both of these every year. He reads through these every year. So I know
every year.
Every week
sometimes.
So let me push a little bit more, throw some more things at you, Elder Davidson. So there are going to be questions that churches have. Like, there are a lot of local churches that wish that they put all this money into purchasing this church, but the conference owns it. And there are things like, and so they're like, we want to have our own. We want to have a sovereignty over our facilities and our buildings. Right. You've got certain policies where certain churches have to use the conference underwriter or insurance. You've got situations like this. This is a real situation where many members will ask us, and we've even had some clergy on our program say things like, at the local level, churches cannot use tithe to pay bills, right? Can't use tithe to pay the mortgage, can't use tithe to pay the light bill, but they take the tithe and they send that up to the conference office, who in turn uses tithe to pay the mortgage of their building and pay the light bill at the conference office, and they send tithe money up to the union, and the union uses tithe to pay. And there's what those are policies, but what's the process if we wanted to have a say so or to tweak those things? What's the processes that people could dig their teeth into to be able to make some changes there if they wanted to?
Good question. And again, maybe it'd be helpful to just kind of explain, at least from my understanding, and I don't claim to know everything about it, but how the policies are developed. And for instance, there are occasions when a conference might say to us at the Southern Union, we would like maybe a variance to this particular policy because of something taking place in their local conference. And so we are able to move that to the North American Division for either a variance or a change in that policy. And so to just make it real simple, the local church member, if they were to read a policy, whatever that might be, and say, I really think the church would operate better if it was done this way and it was changed, the mechanism for that would be to ask your local conference executive committee to forward that request through the union to the North American Division, and then they will take that under advisement. They may change it, they may not, but by the time it comes to the North American Division year-end meeting, again, that is their executive committee, which is made up of a majority, I believe, of lay people, pastors, administrators, etc. And so again, it goes through that vetting process. But for a local church,
Elder, I'm sorry, I'm the slowest one on this panel today. So I just want to make sure, because that's it sounds like some information I have never heard before, and I want to make sure that I've got it and that our listeners got it. So you're saying if there's somebody in a local church who has a concern about some policy that has been enacted through or at the, what was it, general conference level or division level?
Division,
The division level, then the process is...
But primarily across the division level,
okay.
Yeah.
At a division level policy, then the process would be for them to, what'd you say, write their local conference executive committee, asking...
Well, probably the secretary of the conference or the president, yes.
Okay, we're about to get a whole lot of executive secretaries, a whole lot of mail.
And I would add this too. I think that letter or phone call, whichever form it would take, would have a lot more credibility if that local church board, for instance, was looking at that rather than just one individual person. And interestingly enough, as an aside, theological positions are treated in the same way. It is not uncommon for somebody to say, I have new light that has been given to me. Well, there is a process for how that new light can be viewed and looked at and considered. And it's pretty much that same process. So again, either whether it's theological or policy, there is a mechanism within the church that, and I'm going to, again, I think it will be a lot more influential if it's a church or a church board requesting something like that than just one individual person.
So is there any teeth in that, in the sense of, can that church board's letter or that member's letter, in theory, it can die on the secretary's desk before it goes any further?
Probably could. It depends, if the policy change was to say that we really don't want to be called the Seventh-day Adventist Church anymore, we would like to be called something different, that probably could die there.
Or we want to start doing church on Sunday now, or
right, that'd be a theological position, right, for sure. And that probably would die. I'm not going to kid you. But again, most of our policies, in fact, almost all of them, are just practical ways that the church does business. And if there is something there that a church feels, you know what, we think it could be done better this way, then I think, that's going to be seriously looked at and considered, and the process would take place.
So every member has a voice, or every church has a voice. And I think that's good to know. But I have a question here. So who gets these policies, though? Because you held up the general conference policy, you held up the working policy. I believe the union must have some policy book conference. Who gets it? Like, does every local member have access to these policy books, or just an elite group of people?
Why are you trying to expose stuff, Dr. Henry? Trying to put stuff on?
No, you're right. Actually, in the working policy itself, it says who those policy books are to go to.
Oh.
And it is certainly the officers of the local conference on up. And then also it says and recommends that your executive committee each have a policy book. And actually, I just having just read that, I thought, I don't think we really do that. Most, to be honest with you, unless a person is really, really engaged and dive in, this will put you right to sleep. If you have a problem with insomnia, that's your book. And the reason for why a lot of it is not given to just the average person is there's so much in there that the average person wouldn't even want to be bothered with, because it deals with employment policies, it deals with pay structures, it deals with so many things. So it's not, so that may be a little bit, but I tell people all the time, hey, here's what the policy looks like. You can dive in. Especially, I would say the next level down are pastors, because they really are affected. And a lot of pastors and educators who are the employees of the conference are affected in a number of ways as it relates to the policy on the pay scale, wage scale, benefits, all of those things. So pastors really, we should probably do a better job. We talk about engagement. We probably should do a better job saying, here's where the policies are that we have, so you can be familiar with it. So if there is something that needs to be changed, you have the power to say, hey, I'm at least aware of it. Because the first thing I think you have to do is educate yourself. I do want to say one other thing about policy. We've talked about this a little bit, but one of the policies that we have really, and it's a policy book, is your church manual.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that's how the church is to conduct its work. Now, the interesting thing about the church manual is it can only be changed every 5 years at a general conference session.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Now, but just what Elder Jim said, or Davidson said, we have something that's coming from our union that we formulated at least maybe 3 years ago. It's got to be at least 3 years ago, because I was still conference secretary. That is headed up that process. We formed it at the union, so we skipped the local conference level. We did it as union secretaries coming together for our union, and then we submitted that to our union executive committee. They voted this change, and then we sent it on and followed it to the North American division. They have voted that change, and every now and then I'll check up on the change, because I was really the one that was pushing it. And it is on the docket for the general conference session. So that is the way that you can make changes. Now, they could have easily voted it down on whatever level, but it has gone all the way to, and you've got to realize too, and you know this about the Adventist Church, we've got 1 million committees. And so a lot of these things are vetted through committees. So Elder Jim will tell you that when we're at the year-end meeting, when there's a policy change, at the top of that policy change, they will have an abbreviation of every committee that it's gone through before it reaches the body.
You brought out a good point there, Elder Woodson. When you brought out the church manual, and I have to say this, boy, you came prepared for this interview with all the books. But I think our members are missing this piece of information. The church manual is the starting point of how we look at policy. And the working policy, I think there's a difference between working policy and church policy. And some of us get confused and we skip the church policy and we run right to the working policy. But the policy in the church manual is the basis. And I want to challenge every member, everyone who's listening, whether you're a baptized member or not, you need to get yourself a church manual. And it's free. And you can go online and get it for free. And you don't need to buy anything. You can get it as a PDF onto your computer. And that's where it begins. That's where it begins, at the church manual level.
I agree.
Mm-hmm. Well, when we talk about policies, we talk about procedures in the church and how to change them. I don't know. Oftentimes I find that there's a large portion of our membership that really are not engaged. They're really not engaged. I mean, and I think last week we got some insight on this, but they just say, you know what? I mean, that's their church. They can have it. I want to do ministry. And they're just not engaged. What type of words can we say for people who are just not engaged in the policies, who feel like these policies and procedures are challenges for them to do ministry? What can we say to them to get them engaged?
Well, I was going to say that the reality to me is that policies won't interest everybody. Just like when we go to a conference constituency, the bylaws discussion doesn't really engage everybody, and that's okay. Everybody has their own expertise, their own areas of interest, etc. As I said, maybe at the top of our program today, my concern is just, I think we could do a much better job in helping our people know how our structure gives to them the opportunity for ministry. Give you an example. Some years back now, the North American Division was sharing with a group of us that every year, the North American Division sends 1,000 missionaries out to do mission work. I didn't know that. At the time, I was a conference president. I didn't know that. And, the structure gives so many people opportunity, whether that's to be a student missionary, whether that's to be a medical missionary, whether that's to somehow engage in the church and ministry. Because I think what you said, Deanna, is right. Most people just want to do ministry. Don't burden me with policies and don't burden me with a bylaws committee. Just free me up to go out and win souls or to serve my community. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. And yet our structure enables so many avenues of ministry that people could become involved in. And again, we probably have not done a great job at helping people know what some of those avenues are that they could plug into and just do ministry, So
I think I think that's great. And I would agree with what I've just heard. I think there are a lot of people who, you've got some people that love policy. They love those kind of details. Right. But I would want to spend way more time getting people engaged in the mission of the church. Mm-hmm. And at any time, I think there are those of us who are experts, like Elder Jim on policy. There are those who are experts, and let a lot of them do that work. But it doesn't mean that we don't want to hear from the church level, because I think that's so important, so that policies aren't so far removed from what needs to enhance our mission. But I think one of the ways too is that I'm really working on as a conference leader, and that is constantly communicating with our people what's going on. We have a newsletter that goes out, an email newsletter that's every week that goes to our members. It talks about what mission is happening. It's talking about what's going on, how you can be involved, what the church is doing. That is really where you want people engaged. I know sometimes it's a necessary thing to have these constituency meetings, because we have to govern. We have to move forward with leadership and govern. But, we ought to spend a lot less time in those kinds of meetings and a lot more time in doing ministry and getting our people engaged what's happening, because a conference constituency session is not the thing that's going to get people to heaven. It's not the thing. It's a necessary thing, but let's not get so caught up in that. And you all know here, you've been to probably a number of constituency sessions. Oftentimes, our people are turned off by some of the political wrangling that it seems like that happens at some of these sessions. And that can't be what we're about. That just can't be what we're about as a people. This concepts of perceived power. When I first got elected to be a conference executive secretary, I was sitting there and I was saying to myself, you mean to tell me this is one of the positions that people actually fight over? It's crazy. We have to be servant leaders, and it's about carrying out that mission and doing everything we can to remove obstacles so that the local church conference can do the ministry that we're called by God to do in the Great Commission.
Well, here's, I think, another side to that same coin. And that is, particularly our young people, a lot of our young people anyway, a lot of young people, they want exactly what we just articulated. They want to get out there and do the work. They don't care about the politics of the church. They just want to get out there, win some souls, help somebody, make the world a better place. And oftentimes what they find that is blocking the way is policy. They go and they ask, can we do this? And somebody says, there's a policy that means you have to do this, or you can't do, or you have to do it this way. And so sometimes it's the same thing that on one hand seems to facilitate mission and facilitate us getting out there and doing that. On the other hand, because they're creative. They want to do things that are out of the box, and out of the box generally means out of policy. They're just, and so that brings us back to a lot of those people who are wanting. They're saying, yeah, we do want to get out there and do the work. We want to be creative. We want to be innovative. But policy and the structure that hasn't changed since, those are the things that are keeping us from being able to go forward, at least to go forward with the church's blessing. Which brings us to just another little pivot. So what happens, and we didn't talk about this in the pre, and my apologies, but I got to throw these two C words out here. What's the I forgot what the first C word was, but I definitely know what the second one. What happens when we are out of compliance with the policy, with policies that exist? Governance, it has consequences. That's the other term I was looking for. Consequences, and when somebody's out of compliance. Now, that's a trigger word. I think we all a lot of folk know what we're talking about there. There was some discussion a couple years back about church institutions or individuals being out of compliance, particularly with general conference policy. Can somebody just give us two things? One, where is that conversation now? Or has there been any developments in that? And then just on the general level, I guess that brings us back to process. If the policies are what people feel are blocking them from being able to engage ministry in a creative and innovative way, what do they do? How do they address it?
Well, as you say, that discussion on compliance is, I would consider it somewhat of an ongoing discussion. I know it was a major topic. When was that? Year before last at Fall Council. And the church wrestled with that. And the reason really that the church wrestles with it is coming back to our structure again, because we are in many, many ways autonomous as different church entities. A local conference has their own constituency, a union has their own constituency, and then the general conference has their constituency. And so the question comes, when one of those entities is opposed to a policy that maybe has been voted by the general conference, what, if any, are the consequences to that? And the church has wrestled with that, and I think they've come up with somewhat of a process of trying to reconcile and keep everybody on the same page. And for the most part, it works. I won't say it's 100% at this point, but it's a challenge. It really is, because every entity of the church, i.e., conference, union, etc., they have their own constituencies. And so and coming back to your word of governance, the union does not govern a local conference.
Right.
They have their own constituency. Right. And the division does not govern the union, because we have our own constituency. And I would not want to change that. I'm going to be honest with you. I think that's a divinely ordained system that God has placed within the church to keep us together, but also to keep us moving forward. And so, again, I can only tell you that the church is wrestling with that discussion and that question, and it probably will be an ongoing question for a while. But I don't know. Pastor Marc, what do you think on that?
Yeah, being in a union that is considered non-compliant directly affects us. I think to the broader question, which is a good one, and I think you've identified it well. I think there's a sense of governance can be a thing which, and this is not a bad word, but it's just one of those things where it's about control. It's about control. And it was one of the reasons why we have organizations, because there's a certain level of control that we do want to have. And I'm not speaking against that. I think just when we look at our structure, we look at our policies, we have to really, really carefully, prayerfully think about how it affects the region or the group in which that policy is affecting that group or group of people in that region. And so, yes, it is an ongoing discussion. It should be. And in this compliance discussion that we've had recently over the last probably 3 or 4 years now, what I think is very off-putting to a lot of people is that there are so many unions and conferences across the general conference, across the world, that are out of compliance in a lot of things. That's the problem. And all of a sudden now we've come up with something about compliance as it related to one issue. That doesn't look fair to a lot of people. When I know, because the head of I'm going to get in trouble. I'll just say general conference auditing at the session that we had, the committee that was the fall council that was in Battle Creek. He gives up, the head of the general conference auditing gives up and gives a report. And I mean, from a financial, all of the conferences and unions more so that were out of compliance financially was astounding. And I asked him, I said, did you just say, I wanted to make sure that what he gave in his report was true. And he said, yeah, I said that. There are so many that are out of compliance. So I think that's where for those of us who are now considered out of compliance, I think that's what doesn't stick well, is that you have been selective in your approach to who is compliant and really trying to find a stick. It's been more of a stick than a carrot. So that's the part that I think we've got to be careful with as a church, because when I was at Battle Creek, I didn't give this speech, and I kept saying I wanted to give this speech, and I'm glad I probably didn't, Jim. But sitting there in Battle Creek, what I wanted to say was, here we are at the very kind of the cradle of the Adventist Church here of organization. And we must recognize that, going back to what I said before, the church and its people did not want to organize, and they did not want to organize, in my opinion, for what we're experiencing right now in this meeting. That people have a sense of conscience, people have a sense of right and wrong, and you're saying it doesn't matter, your conscience doesn't matter in this. What matters is we have decided this is supposed to happen. That we're going to have to wrestle through as a church.
Well, listen, you all are hitting it on the head.
Right.
I think this is the an area that a lot of our members don't want to hear, or at least they're not really interested in, because they just want to do ministry. But one of our viewers, Jennifer, she asked the question: what data do we have? And being a former executive secretary, and even being an executive secretary, what data do we have that we use to measure whether we are effectively doing the mission? Is there any data out there for that, or is it just conjecture and consensus?
Right. I just want to add to that. I mean, the structure that we have. I mean, is it fulfilling what we wanted to fulfill right now? What data do we have that this structure is fulfilling what we wanted to fulfill, that we are meeting that mission, that we are effective?
So I think that the first thing is we have to be very clear about what are the things that we're going to count, our measurables, right? We've got to be very clear about what we consider our measurables to be. Now, for a lot of us, some of the simple things that we measure are tithe and offerings and then baptisms, right? And then who our membership, right? And our growth. So we're first of all going to have to agree upon what are our metrics, right? What are our metrics? What is really going to tell us in our metrics, are we carrying out our mission? And so let's just say it's baptisms, right? And we look and we say, okay, are the number of baptisms, in the North American division, we're growing probably at between 1% and 2%. Is that effective? Can we do better? And if we can do better, what about our structure or governance keeps us from doing better, if at all? Mm-hmm. That's, I think, the question that you have to wrestle with, just on that specific topic. Or we could say, are we reaching, when you look at the average or the median age of the North American Division Church, it's, last I checked, was at 55. How effective are we at reaching you talk about that Z generation, millennial generation, and those coming on. How effective are we at reaching young families overall, the graying of the North American Division Church? And it's unique to North America. So how do we measure that? Is there something about our structure and our governance that is the cause of that, or is it something else? Mm-hmm. So, but that's where you have to look at it. You have to say, where are the measurables? What are the metrics? And how does what we do stand in the way of that? And sometimes what we do does stand in the way of that. Paul was talking about, if young people want to do a particular thing, but the policy, stands in the way of that. Well, we've got to identify that. And sometimes we have to say, yeah, you know what, that is kind of in the way. And it doesn't make sense to do that. Or you look at that policy and say, it protects the church. That's why we don't allow you to just go and run and do whatever, because as our risk management person was in a meeting with us and said that I think they had to lay out like $20 million this year in terms of, in 10 years, in 10 years, from 2009 to 2019, in terms of settlements. Mm. See, so there are things in structure that try to protect the church and its resources, where from 2000 to 2009 or 2008, there were only $2 million worth. And then 10 years later, there's 20 million. So something's happening, of course, in our society. But those policies are there oftentimes to protect our resources.
So I'll be honest with you. I didn't pick up which particular data that we use to check to see if it's working. Is it because it's an interpretation situation? One conference may say, well, this is what works for us. And then another conference or another union say, hey, this is what works for us. And so then you have all of these ideas out there, all of these things that are saying we're measuring differently, but yet still we want to have this unified church. And it can't happen if we're all using different measuring sticks. Is there a possibility to change that, or are we stuck with this? Or are we asking for too much, trying to find out if this is effective across the board?
I think I think there are certain metrics that are universal. As Pastor Woodson said, I mean, we look at tithe, we look at membership, we look at baptisms, that type of thing. But that doesn't tell the whole story by any stretch. I pastored for many, many years, so I keep coming back to the local church as an example. Sometimes as a pastor, I might have a year where there weren't as many baptisms in my church as normal or as typical. But it might be because we were in the midst of a major building program. And that was taking a lot of our time, resources, energies, etc. And so if the only metric was baptisms that year, it probably wouldn't be real good. But we had other metrics that year. Were we accomplishing the goals that we had set for ourselves? And I think that goes somewhat across the denomination. Every area, every geographical area that is, will have different goals at different times. And again, always with the intent of taking the gospel to the world and sharing the gospel. That's a given. That's a consistent goal that we have. But again, it may vary from year to year and place to place as to what that metric is. And I think the other thing that as a church, I would hope anyway that we are, and that is, I use the term, I hope we always have what I would call a holy discontent. In other words, no matter what we accomplish or what God accomplishes through the church, we're never content with that. Yeah. And I know if I do an evangelistic meeting and 20 people are baptized, I wish it was 40. Yeah. And if there were 40, I would wish it was 60. Right. And we're just never, and I don't think that's a bad thing. Right. And I think we need to maintain that holy discontent and constantly be holding ourselves up. Are we doing the best we can do? And no matter how good it may be, and I say it that way because a while back, just a few years ago, USA Today cited the Seventh-day Adventist Church as the fastest growing denomination in North America, in the United States. Well, that's great. I'm glad we're growing. That's a positive, but I'm not content with that. As you say, that was 2%. I'm not content with that at all. Right. And so again, I think there's that metric of a holy discontent that we need to always have as well.
Wow. Well, just a couple more things. I know it's almost time to go, but I want to know from your standpoint, we have this structure and, we've been picking apart the structure for this show, but we feel like, well, not we feel, but it seems like we have been doing some things that are positive and impactful. However, if there are two things that you can change about the current structure, I'll talk about the governance that might motivate or inspire greater engagement in the mission, what would those things be?
I've been wrestling with this all day today since yesterday when we talked about this. Might be a question. One of them that I would say is that I would want to see changed is actually in the process of changing, but there's just probably a lot more can be done. I think I would like to see us become a little bit more, if I can use this phrase, because I hate the idea of top to bottom, but I'll say more grassroots. I would like to see us become much more bottom heavy than top heavy. And it doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of, like I said yesterday, when you're a church member, you say, I don't know why what the pastor does. When you're a pastor, you say, I don't know what they do at the conference level, why we need it. When you're at the conference level, you say, I don't know why we need a union. When you're at the union level, I don't know why there's a division.
Wow.
Why is there a general conference? So but I think that I just having been on at this level or this experience of the church on a conference level, I think we've got, there's some things that I think we could streamline more. To not be so top heavy. I know the North American division, for instance, and I think we've got to keep doing this. There's a certain amount of tithe that goes from every level of the church, right? And so the division finally did come to agreement with the General Conference. And I don't want to get too much in the weeds of this, to not give as much, because I can tell you the North American division of all the divisions was probably giving 2 times, Jim would know this, 2 and 3 times more than all of the other divisions, and sometimes combined. And so the amount of money that was going to the General Conference from the North American division, we have come to agreement where that's been scaled back considerably. It's going to be over, I think, 5 years or so, scaled back considerably the percentage, so that it could go back down. And the thought is so that the local church, we can push those resources back down to the local church. So we've got to do that really on every level. I think we've got to not have, do we need all of the department directors that we've got? Do we need all of the vice presidents that we have on different levels of the church, from the General Conference? Do we need so many executive secretaries? Do we need, under treasurer, so many under treasurers, so many, we need to look at those things and say those are salaries. And I will tell you the bulk of what comes, like in our budget, 90% of what we get, that what we have in tithe, that's basically for employees. That's for pastors and employees, most of anything else. So when you cut back on that then helps for resources, at least financial resources, to come back down. And I think we've got to continue to do that, I think. Good. So we're not so top heavy.
Wow.
Awesome.
Wow.
Right. And I didn't know if you had a second one or not, but
no, that's enough.
and boy, I don't want to sound like a broken record here today, but I'm like Mark. I have been wrestling with this today, this question, and as I said earlier, I don't know that we need just a complete restructure, but I think we need a continual look at the structure we have and to how we can utilize that better. And I would say that from, and I look at it just as the wider circles of the church. And I'm with Mark. I don't consider it levels. I consider it wider areas or circles of the church. And to me, that starts with the local church. And that is, just because we've always had a certain office in the church, do we always have to elect a person to that office? Same on the conference, same in the union, same in the division. We need to, again, have an evaluation going on as to the function. And again, I bring it back. I don't think it typically ever is the person. I think it's the position. Do we need that position, whether it be in the local church or in the division, however wide that circle may be? And I just hope we can have that ongoing discussion with that. And then lastly, and real quick, and that is, I just have a real burden for helping our people, especially our young people. And I agree with you. They don't know how the structure of the church works. And many of them aren't concerned about that, and that's okay too. I just want them to be able to plug into the advantages in the ministries that it makes available to them, whether that be youth ministry with Pathfinders on a wider scale than just the local church, or whether it be medical and dental. That's an area that I work in the Southern Union as well. And there's just so many areas of opportunity that all is provided and is given some amount of structure by the way our church is organized, that they can plug into and they can be blessed by, whether that's a Share Him mission trip, whether that just on and on the list can go. And I'm excited about that. And we've got to do a better job at plugging in our people to what opportunities are already there. That's a burden that I think we need to take a strong hard look at.
I do have a second one that finally came to my mind, if I can share it.
Yes.
Yes.
This will be a bomb that I'm throwing in as we close. I really think for freshness, I think that we should have term limits on every level of this church.
Every level.
I think we ought to have some conferences. I know it's in their bylaws. I think we ought to have term limits and we can talk about what that looks like, but I think there ought to be term limits, especially in our conferences, our unions, and in our division and in our general conference. We ought to have term limit. I think gone are the days that we should have one person for 25 and 30 years serving as the president of a conference.
Wow. I mean, that's a bomb right there.
Whoa.
Coming from a conference president. That's big. That's big. Well, listen, thank you so much for coming on this program, just educating us about the structure of the church and how we were formed and the governance and the policies. I especially like the policies, giving us the difference of the different policies in our church. And we definitely we have to have them back on again so that we could dive into this, dive into this term limit that you're talking about.
Yes.
Yeah, a number of our viewers.
My people are saying, "Yeah, we got you a term limit." All right.
We have a number of our viewers who are actually beginning to ask questions now. I think they're getting it. I think this was an area in our church that people really didn't know what it meant or how to use it. And I hope today that they got a piece, just a small piece, because we haven't even scratched the surface on how to really deal with the governance in our church. And I have to say this, I'm glad for this church that we put so much into our governance, because that helps us to organize, but it also helps us to see how are we actually affecting the mission. Is it really is our policies affecting the mission? Is it affecting the doctrines? And governance helps us with that. So thank you so much, gentlemen, for helping us see this.
Yeah. And again, as we continue in our discussion, we're talking about different things, ways that we can improve the effectiveness of this church. But I would say that I think that we've had some successes over the years. I think that our structure, although me, Pastor Paul and Pastor Wade, I do see a lot of things that need to be changed, definitely in our church and the way we operate. But I do want to say this, that I think that we've done some good, and that's why we have a worldwide movement. So again, I think there's advantages definitely of being part of this church. So praise God for you. Next week, what do we have on the table next week? I know it's like so far away. It's Labor Day weekend, but what's going on next week?
Well, I know that we have been praying about this topic for so long. We have been dealing with how to best present this topic. And Elder Marc, you kind of alluded to it a little bit. And we're going to be dealing with women in ministry, but we're coming at it from the concept of the barriers that women in ministry face.
Wow.
And we are excited about to not just be the typical should we ordain women kind of thing. We listen, our women, they have shown us, not that they had to, but it has been seen that women handle business when it comes to ministry. There's no question about it.
Sure.
And I want to see more women involved in ministry. And so in order to do that, we need to talk about what are some of the things that we keep putting up that stops them from being in ministry in certain position and things like that. So we're going to spend some time next week dealing with barriers that women in ministry face.
All right. Great job.
I'm going to watch next week.
Yeah, we are still trying to finalize our guests, but we have already tapped into a number of women who are going to share with us. And we have even, if they were not available for next week, we actually connected with them so that they can come on subsequent other shows down the road. So we are very excited about the impact that women have in ministry, and will help us have this discussion on ministry here.
All right. And by the way, before Pastor Paul comes in and chimes in, listen, season 2, I want to tell you, it is going to be amazing. We are going into areas where it's just going to be mind-boggling. We're talking to some individuals that are part of different entities and so forth. That's going to be, I'm telling you, I just want to say this. Listen, get ready for season 2. You are actually going to see a different look too in season 2. I said something.
He said it. It's out there now.
It's out there. It's going to be amazing. So listen, be prepared. Season 2 is going to be awesome, and that's coming up soon.
Hey, listen, thank you everybody for joining us today. We've appreciated your presence, your comments, your questions. We're going to put some, if you are not a part of the Pastors Roundtable group page, many of you are following the page, but then there's the group. We want you to join the group. Over the next couple of weeks, we're going to be putting up some little surveys, some questions that we want to get your feedback on. So make sure that you request to join the Pastors Roundtable group. We want you to subscribe, if you're watching on YouTube, to subscribe to the Pastors Roundtable YouTube channel, and to hit that little bell. The little bell there is going to give you information about when we go live, or if we put any other content up that is not a live feed, that you'll get notice of when that is up. Thank you again so much for joining us today. Say hello to somebody as we close. Just put in the chat where you're watching from, the name of your city, your town, your church. We want to know where you've joined us from today. Thank you again to our guests. We appreciate you being with us here at the Pastors Roundtable, where it is our aim to help keep ministry relevant,
resource,
and real.
We'll work on that. Goodbye, everybody. Have a great afternoon.